welcome, Shabbat Shalom. And folks are still trickling in, coming from dinner or coming from home. So I encourage you to come in and find a seat, make yourself at home under the dome, as we say here. So whether it's your first time here or you've been here countless times, we're so glad to welcome you for this really special Shabbat that kicks off a whole Shabbat of learning and connecting and being together in community for a very long planned learning weekend in celebration of 18 decades as a community. In 1842, there were 9 Jews in the city of Boston who decided that they should form a community and give themselves a name. And they chose the name Temple Ohabei Shalom, those who love peace, lovers of peace is the meaning of our name. And many people have worked very hard to pull from an immense archive of material that we have here at the temple that dates back all the way to 1842. Incredibly well preserved, given that over the years it wasn't necessarily kept as archives should be kept, and it was in various places, and we've worked very hard to get things into shape and to pull some of these documents and images out into the light for all of you. So there is an exhibit in our foyer that I hope you've already had a chance to see or will see later on after the service, because there is nothing quite like seeing the, for instance, handwritten board meeting minutes from 1909. Things like that I discovered in my office when I arrived here at the temple over 5 years ago. So you will enjoy, I hope, delving into our history, connecting around, of course, something that has an even longer history than Temple Ohabei Shalom is the tradition of Shabbat. Such a long history that it is built into the fabric of creation itself, as we read about in Torah and read about just last week in the first Torah portion of our new Torah reading cycle. And so it's actually a really fitting time in Torah time. We're at the very beginning and we're starting over again. And we're thinking about this long history of our temple community, which has been standing strong. And we know that to be a community doesn't only mean the building, far from it. And we learned over these almost 3 years that when we can't even have access to our building and be together physically, we are still a very strong and vibrant community. So we're very pleased to have this Shabbat as a time when we can connect and learn, starting with this evening. And as you know, Congressman Jake Auchincloss will be sharing some remarks and talking with us after our service. For now, I want to invite you to take a deep breath and just settle into this sanctuary in time, not only our sanctuary in space, but Shabbat as a sanctuary in time, as a cathedral in time, as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel called it. Shabbat, this time of stepping back, and no matter where you've come from, physically, where you're coming from emotionally, where you're coming from Jewishly, spiritually, you are part of a sacred community tonight under our dome as we look back to our history in order to move forward with strength and blessing. So we take a deep breath just to center ourselves in Shabbat time. And as you do that, there's just one more thing I want to share by way of introduction, and that is something I heard just today from the great thinker and writer and podcast host, Krista Tippett from On Being. She said that she learned from a sociologist named Elise Boulding something called the 200-year present, and that each of us inhabits a 200-year present. And she said, in your 200-year present, it begins with the year of the birth of the oldest person that you knew when you were a child. So I'd like you to all think of the oldest person that you knew when you were a child. and what would have been the year of their birth. And then the other boundary of that 200-year present would be the 100th birthday of the youngest person you have held in your arms. And she says, for most of us, that's going to be about a 200-year present that touches our lives directly and that we directly touch. It was so timely, no pun intended or pun intended, that I heard this just today, listening to Krista Tippett. And imagine that, we're each part of a 200-year present. And the history of our temple community is almost stretches that long. And think back and think forward as we're here together in this sacred moment of tonight and this Shabbat and this 180th year. So among the many people who've been working very hard for a very long time to make sure that we celebrate our 180th year in a robust and vibrant and beautiful way, is Larry Green, one of our past presidents, who chaired the 180th celebration committee. And this was no small feat because the committee began meeting many, many months ago. I think it was more than a year ago, actually, because we began celebrating last spring. It was already the 180th year. We brought in a wonderful musical guests from Jerusalem, and we kicked off the year that way. And we've done many other activities since, including tree planting in East Boston, all under the direction and leadership of Larry Green. So for lighting candles, I'd like to invite Larry and Denise Green to come up, and also Sam Miller and Jody Kraft Miller to come up and join them. Your whole family here on the bima, representing really 3 generations. Yeah. There will, God willing, be another generation coming soon. And so what a beautiful thing it is to have you all here together to light candles this evening. The candle lighting blessing is found in your Siddur and your prayer book on page 2. Baruch atah Adonai Elohei melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for everything. Denise is a hugger. Thank you all.
So this time we begin our formal welcoming of Shabbat, our Kabbalat Shabbat, the Kabbalistic mystics in medieval northern Israel created this series of blessings and this ritual that we now know as Kabbalat Shabbat. But in their time, if you can imagine, they would go out to the edge of the hills in northern Israel and stand at the edge of the forests on the edge of the hills, watching the sunset with open arms, literally waiting to receive what the Talmud teaches is angels or spirits that accompany us home after we welcome Shabbat, or in other texts that it says we are granted a second soul on Shabbat. Either or both of those are beautiful, beautiful images. And we have this liturgical poem, Shalom Alechem, which can be found on page 24, which speaks directly to these angels, these spirits, this notion that we are welcoming in this time out of time, taking a pause, existing entirely differently and allowing this time, if we choose to receive it, to change us from the inside out.
Turn to page 20 and 21 for another welcoming song for Shabbat. We like to make Shabbat feel so welcomed, as if Shabbat is a presence, is a real presence that we would rise and greet and bow to. So we're going to sing Lecha Dodi when we get to verse 9, our final verse. We sing verses 1, 2, 5, and 9, just to keep you on your toes. And then we will get up, we'll rise as we're able to face the door in verse 9 and bow and greet that presence of Shabbat, page 20. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat likrat kala, b'nei b'nei Shabbat mikabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat likrat kala, b'nei b'nei Shabbat mikabela. La 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 la, lecha dodi, likrat likrat kala, b'nei b'nei Shabbat mikabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat likrat kala. שמור וזכור לדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם תפארת ולצילה, לה 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 לה, לך דודי, לקראת לקראת קלה, בני שבת לקבלה, לך לך דודי, לקראת לקראת קלה, בני שבת לקבלה, verse 9, הדודי, לקראת לקראת קלה, בני שבת לקבלה, לך דודי, לקראת לקראת קלה, בני שבת לקבלה. לקראת שבת צפו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה, לה 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 לה, לך דודי, לקראת לקראת קלה, בני שבת לקבלה, לך לך דודי, לקראת לקראת קלה, בני שבת לקבלה, לה 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 לה, לך דודי, לקראת לקראת קלה, בני שבת לקבלה, לך לך דודי, לקראת לקראת קלה, בני שבת if you are able to do so, and we'll begin on page 46 with the prayer that we be able to pray, and then we will chant the first few blessings together, and then a prayer for peace, Shalom Rav. Page 46.
Adonai sefatai tiftach
Ufi tehillatcha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise.
Page 48. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים וחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, נאמן אתה לחיות הכל, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. Page 52. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
And you're welcome to either remain standing for the prayer for peace or to be seated. Page 60. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Ki אתה הוא מלך אדון לכל השלום. כי אתה הוא מלך אדון לכל השלום. שלום רב על ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. שלום רב על ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שלום רב על ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. שלום רב על ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. Shabbat, we are meant to bask in our blessings and not to focus much on what we don't have, not to pray for things that we lack, but we know that this world always needs more peace and more healing. So we just prayed for peace. We'll now move into our prayer for healing. We can be seated, but we call to mind and to heart those we know who are in need of refuah, healing of body or healing of spirit. And those on the Zoom are welcome to bring names into the chat to bring them into our space tonight. And from our community, we're thinking of John Murray, Carolyn Coney, Chaim Meir ben Shlomo v'Chanalea, Harvey Solomon, Linda Hoffman, Leah Bat Kayla, Esther Neshama, Karen Weber, Esther Tzvia Bat Asha v'Nachama, Judy Shepro, Chaim Mesh, Chaya Blima Bat Chaim Chia Vasilia Rochel, Joe Siegel, Joseph Siegel, Yosef Ben Herschel Verut, Jeffrey Colts, and Glenna Bug. Misha Berach, the healing prayer, we'll sing from the middle of page 253. Misha Berach, Avoteinu, Vekol Hamracha, Lehimoteinu, may the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach, Imoteinu, Mekor habracha, La'avoteinu, may those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Please rise for Aleinu as we move to the conclusion of our service, that we'll have time for our guest speaker this evening. Aleinu is on page 282.
Aleinu l'shabeach Adon hakol, lateit hilal yotzer b'reshit, shehu notei shamayim ve'oseh haaretz, u'mashav yikaro b'shamayim ima'o, u'shechinatu zo b'govei merhomim, u'Eloheinu einod, v'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu. 287. V'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech hamu haaretz, hayom hahu yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad.
We can be seated. And at this time, we have the opportunity for the recitation of Mourner's Kaddish. So those who are observing a yard site, an anniversary of a death, or are in a period of mourning, I invite you at this time to rise if you're comfortable and able to rise and share the name of those you are remembering. Denise. Gosh. Sorry. And anyone on Zoom is welcome to bring names into the chat. And as a community, we extend our condolences, Natasha, to you and your family on the loss of your mother, Marilyn Bass Goldman, your mother, mother-in-law of Joaquim Homan, and grandmother of Tobias and Adam. May the memory of all those we remember tonight be for an eternal blessing. And we all rise for Mourner's Kaddish, page 294. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'alma divra chirute, v'yamlich malchute, v'chayechon u'vyomechon, u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, hagala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehe Shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalal Shmei dekudesha v'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran v'alma v'imru amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. We can be seated.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We are thrilled to see all of you here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody on Zoom for joining us. We have a full calendar of events spanning into tomorrow to continue celebrating our community's 180th anniversary. And a huge thank you goes out to Larry Green and Mark Gale and everybody who's contributed to the 180th celebration. Please join us tomorrow for services and learning sessions, starting with breakfast at 9 a.m. Services will be at 9:30 in the chapel, and at 10:30, our learning sessions begin with folks from near and far who have prepared some really incredible opportunities for us to learn together, both about our synagogue's history as well as focusing locally in Brookline, in Massachusetts, in the Jewish world, outside of the Jewish world. And we are really thrilled to be able to bring this opportunity to you all and share it with you all. So please, please, please join us tomorrow. Oh, and 3:30 will be a tour with lifelong TOS member Eddie Jacobs, which is not to be missed. So we hope you have a chance to come by tomorrow. Even if you can only come for an hour, please swing by and say hello, grab a bagel, schmooze a bit. We can't wait to see you.
Yes, feel free to come at any time, leave at any time, come and go. And over lunch, we will have the opportunity to share memories informally with each other. That'll be at 12:30. So please come and share your favorite TOS memories. We're going to close out the service part of our evening with Oseh Shalom, and any kids here are welcome to come to the Bima to join us. We're going to make it short and sweet because then I want to introduce our Congressman Auchincloss to come and speak with us tonight. But we could all use as many prayers for peace as possible in this world. And so we're going to send out, I always tell the kids in religious school, send your prayers out up through the dome or out through the chapel stained glass windows. Send them out to the world. That's great. You guys, thanks for coming up. Let's sing Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom B'Roma. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'al Kol Yoshei Tevel, Ve'imnu, Ve'imnu, Thank you so much, Mateo and Nat and Anna and Idan, for coming up. So without further ado, it's my great honor to welcome as our speaker tonight to help us celebrate this wonderful occasion of 180 years. And by the way, kids who would like to duck out can meet Amy in the back of the chapel, Amy and Jen. If you want to go do something fun, not that hearing from your congressman is not fun, but you might want to do something else, and we won't judge you for that. Representative Jake Auchincloss is serving his first term in Congress, where he's the vice chair of the Financial Services Committee and a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. His areas of focus include infrastructure and housing, the life sciences, and energy policy. Jake was born and raised in Newton, Massachusetts. His parents were a surgeon and a scientist who taught him to be a lifelong learner. And even in the chances that I've had to speak with Representative Auchincloss, it's been clear to me that he is a very curious, intellectually curious and open and insightful person who is always continuing to read and learn. And he says that from the moment he could read, he loved American history. So you found yourself a fitting career. He went to a school you might have heard of, Harvard, and then joined the Marines and commanded infantry in Afghanistan and special operations in Panama. And he's now a major in the reserves. When he returned home, Jake continued service as a 3-term city councilor in Newton. And he loved the constituent services and communication. While serving the public sector on nights and weekends, Jake led product development at both a Fortune 100 insurance company and a cybersecurity startup. He has degrees in economics and finance from Harvard and from MIT Sloan, and lives in Newtonville, not far from me, with his wife, Michelle, and their son, Teddy, and their daughter, Grace, and most importantly, their dog, Donut. So it's my pleasure to welcome the Congressman. Thank you so much. You have your choice of mics here, and we won't make you lead from the prayer book. Do you want this? All right, there you go.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you to Rabbi Berkman and to Mark Gale and to the entire congregation for welcoming here to join you in the service and in the celebration of 180 years. I'm Jake Auchincloss. I'm your representative in Congress, the 4th Congressional District, and it stretches from the inner suburbs of Boston, Brookline, Wellesley, Needham, Newton, where I grew up, all the way south to the border of Rhode Island. And the Mass 4th previously elected heavy hitters, Bob Drinan, Barney Frank, Joe Kennedy. And all of us, I think, would say the same thing, which is that it's a complicated district. I represent a half dozen of the wealthiest Boston suburbs and 3 working class cities. I represent large Lusophone, Asian American, and Jewish communities. And I represent the reddest county in the state, along with some of the bluest zip codes in the entire country. It brings to mind a scene from a movie I love. Many of you, I'm sure, have watched it, Charlie Wilson's War. And Tom Hanks's character at one point declares that his Texas congressional district is the easiest in Congress to represent. He says they want low taxes, they want their guns, and they want to be left alone. And the MA4 is like the exact opposite. This district has lots of opinions, and they share them. My campaign for Congress in 2020 so stressed out my wife, Michelle, that she developed a kidney stone in the final week of our campaign. And the very night we won, I drove her to Newton Wellesley Hospital. And while I'm waiting with her in the hospital room, I get a phone call from Nancy Pelosi. Hospital room or not, that's a phone call you got to take. And so I've got the speaker on speaker, and I've got my wife in a hospital bed across from me, listening with interest and giving me this look that's like, this is the phone call that you wanted, so this had better been worth it, because I'm in a hospital bed right now. And Nancy Pelosi tells us, congratulations, but you now represent a district with a national profile, and your work starts tonight. And my poor wife, Michelle, just gave me a look that was like, oh my goodness. But the speaker was right, per usual. The pace only picked up. My first Wednesday in office was January 6th. My second Wednesday was the impeachment. My third Wednesday was the inauguration of Joe Biden. And from there, it was a once-in-a-century pandemic response, keystoned by the American Rescue Plan to help kids who had been shipwrecked by the storms of COVID. It was a twin set of once-in-a-generation bills to invest in infrastructure, science, and domestic manufacturing. And then just 2 months ago, it was capstoned by the biggest, boldest climate action and clean energy commitment in history. All of this while defending women's rights and really our very democracy from GOP attacks. Now, I commanded Marines on 2 tours overseas, one in Afghanistan and one in special operations. And the Marine Corps taught me that in conditions like that, high stakes, fast decision-making, individuals do not rise to the occasion. Individuals fall to their level of training. My training, my upbringing, has been deeply informed by Judaism and the Jewish community. For starters, the Jewish tradition embraces a diversity of opinion. We prefer debate over doctrine. Contrasting viewpoints and different experiences are not, to the great mass of Jews, heresies to be repented. They are ideas to be wrestled with, even incorporated. And in this spirit, in my first term, I have reached out to build relationships left, center, and right to get things done. After the Supreme Court ruled against the Environmental Protection Agency, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I co-authored legislation to authorize, I should say, the EPA to mandate generation shifting from fossil fuels to clean energy, because this nation has to achieve clean energy independence by investing in an all-of-the-above clean energy strategy that frees us from Middle Eastern oil. And a compromised version of our initiative has now become law. Independence, though, does not mean isolationism. And with Americans struggling with high costs, I teamed up with Stephanie Murphy, the chair of the centrist Blue Dog Coalition, to pressure the Biden administration to cut tariffs and save working families hundreds of dollars a year. Expanding trade, embracing legal immigration, these things are essential to raising productivity and to lowering costs at home and abroad. And on the right, Liz Cheney and I have championed bipartisan support for the strategic defeat of Russia in Ukraine, because the United States must lead the world in upholding the post-war rules-based order that has spread peace and prosperity to ever more people. And we must send a stark message to the authoritarian regime in Moscow, the authoritarian and anti-Semitic regime in Moscow, and to its ally in Beijing, that might does not make right, and that the United States is always going to stand on the side of freedom and democracy. Left, center, right, working with 3 very impressive, very different women to get things done. 2 of these 3 women, though, aren't coming back to Congress. And that's a reflection of a democracy under duress. Individual politicians cannot keep on building bridges on top of institutional foundations that are crumbling. Here again, the Jewish faith is important. For Judaism has 2 important lessons for the United States as we seek to heal our union. The first is the concept of Kalal Yisrael, the Jewish people in oneness. Each Jew is obliged to his neighbor, and the sum of our community is greater than the individuals. From this bond, we derive tremendous social capital. The United States has a similar concept, e pluribus unum, for many one. And yet as Americans, it seems we are more fractured, more lonely, more angry than at any time in living memory. Our social capital as a country is depleted. And politics cannot solve that. We need a resurgence of civil society, what has been called 1,000 points of light. We need more spaces like the one we're in right now, where people can be with one another and transcend the transactional and the political to find, as the rabbi said so eloquently, the miracles in the mundane, and discuss and work on common endeavors. This is essential to the humanity of all of us, but perhaps most impactful for our children. And to this end, I have been deeply engaged both in Washington and here in Massachusetts on initiatives that bring children together, not in Mark Zuckerberg's online 3D metaverse that he wants to create, but in healthy and visceral settings that imbue them with self-efficacy and belonging. Sometimes those endeavors are fancy, like a synthetic biology lab for students who don't have access in their normal K-12 curriculum. But sometimes it's just a good game of dodgeball. What matters is authentic connection and the chance to be part of something bigger than oneself. Community requires commonality, in particular, a shared understanding of facts. And here is a second lesson from Judaism for the American body politic, which is convulsing in an epistemological crisis that undermines the pursuit of common truth through the institutions of law, government, science, and journalism. The former president of Yeshiva University, Rabbi Norman Lamb, famously wrote of the 70 faces of Torah. Each portion of the Torah, he said, has multiple meanings that can be reinterpreted through the ages. Why 70? Well, he said the interpretations are expansive, but they are limited. The number 70 is arbitrary, but the existence of agreed upon boundaries on the license to dispute issues is what matters. The United States has a rich jurisprudential history of reinterpreting constitutional text and a wide-ranging debate on the application of our self-evident truths. And that is good and that is right. That vigorous debate makes us a richer country, but we have lost the boundaries. Lies have become currency, Twitter handles have become PhDs, norms and conventions are relished in the breaking. We must reestablish epistemological integrity in government, science, law, and journalism. And there is no bill for that in Congress. It's the project of a generation, and one that Jews have great moral freight in advancing. I want to close with a personal story to explain why, despite the challenges I've enumerated, I remain so optimistic about this great country. My grandfather, Mel Glimsher, was the son of refugees from the Russian pogroms. He grew up in Chelsea. He grew up poor. In 1941, the age of 17, he tried to join the Marine Corps, and his mother dragged him out by the ear and upbraided the recruiting sergeant. He snuck back in the next day and he got his papers. After assessing his academic performance during basic training, though, the Marine Corps didn't send him overseas. They sent him to Purdue to study biomedical engineering. At a time when the United States was losing the war in the South Pacific and needed every rifle it could get, at a time when Jews were being mass murdered in Europe, the United States Marine Corps decided that a poor, skinny Jewish kid was pretty smart, and they were going to give him a chance and see what he might do with it. He seized that opportunity. He became a world-famous biomedical engineer, inventing a better prosthetic limb and pioneering a new scientific understanding of bone formation. He raised my mom right here in Brookline. She too has become a scientist, breaking barriers as a woman that he broke a generation before as a Jewish man. There is such goodness and greatness in us as Americans, made better and greater by the Jewish community in this country. And I'm confident in our future. And I look forward to our conversation now about what that might be.
Thank you so much, Jake. And we're going to take some questions from you. I have a mic that I'm going to bring around. So please, if you would like to make a comment or question, please raise your hand and we will come around to you.
Thank you. Good evening, Congressman Auchincloss. Thank you for that wonderful speech. My name is Denise Carlin. I live here in Brookline. And one of the things I'd like for you to address is within the Jewish community itself. How do you approach the issue from various members of the Jewish community, both groups and individuals, who require of their elected officials or those running for office that they show an uncritical support of Israeli policies and do not accept criticism of Israel? How do you approach that type of issue?
Well, I don't think we should have an uncritical approach to any government's policies, including, of course, first and foremost, the United States. We've got to have a critical approach, an inquisitive approach, grounded in our self-evident truths as a country. We believe in equality. We believe in equality of opportunity. We believe in the essential dignity of all humans. And friends are sometimes the ones who need to be first to critique and first to offer points about where things can be improved. Having said that, I'm a steadfast supporter of the U.S.-Israel alliance. I believe it's essential for advancing our shared values. I believe it's essential for the security of Israel in the Middle East. I think it's good for both countries, but it is not an institution, like any institution, that is somehow above debate. As I said in my remarks, we need to have a political culture where we have vigorous debate and one that's grounded in shared facts.
As an ex-Marine, how do you view the way we got out of Afghanistan? When I talk to my friends in the Midwest, they believe that that emboldened Russia and Ukraine, has perhaps emboldened China a little bit in Taiwan.
I don't think it's emboldened either. I don't think it precipitated Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There is not a good way to lose a war. And for 3 administrations, Democrat and Republican, the US national security establishment obfuscated and dissembled with the American public about what our chances were in Afghanistan and what our policy was in Afghanistan. And it really was not until 2014 with the Special Inspector General's assessment of Afghanistan, SIGAR, that any of the basic facts and the own deep sense of skepticism within the US national security elite even became transparent to the American people. And so for that reason, I give Joe Biden tremendous credit for having the moral courage to tell the American people the hard truth that that war was not a war we could win. Because upstream of military tactics is political solutions. We could have stayed in Afghanistan for 20 more years, spent $2 trillion more, and we could have won every single firefight we have with the Taliban. I was there. I can tell you, we win when we fight the Taliban. We're better at it than they are. But to what end? There was no political solution coming from Kabul because Afghanistan is not functionally a nation that can be governed from Kabul. There was no political leadership. There was endemic corruption. And while we had made important strides forward with literacy, particularly for young girls, but for young boys as well, with electrification, with some of the infrastructure for an industrialized economy, there were none of the political sinews necessary to bind together Afghanistan into a coherent state. And it was time for us to acknowledge that reality and to pivot towards our true geostrategic priority, which is the Indo-Pacific and containing the Chinese Communist Party's revisionist foreign policy and authoritarian mindset for really an entire hemisphere in this world.
Congressman, mental illness is a major problem in the United States. In your role, what could you do to help combat mental illness?
It's an important question and one that really has crystallized during and since the worst of the pandemic. There's a whole portfolio of things we have to do. So forgive me if I jump here, but so one is money. We have underinvested relative to mental health than we have in terms of physical well-being in this country. We are fixing that slowly. At the federal level, more money has been passed for mental health in the last two budgets than previously by big bounds. That includes both clinical delivery of mental health services, but also basic research into the brain, the most mysterious, least understood entity in the entire universe, the human brain. We have to understand it better, not just for mental health, I'll add, but for Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases that are really going to plague us in the 21st century. So we're spending more money. We're training more people. We are really undersupplied in terms of mental health professionals, both at the MD and at the nurse practitioner level. We need to expand the faculty and expand the number of slots at these institutions. Working to do that as well. We have funded that as well. And I'll add that Massachusetts, we're going to see next week, maybe the week after, with the economic development at the state level. Massachusetts is also going to put significant funding behind mental health, which is going to be an important step forward. We can change some of the regulations. During COVID, we allowed for telehealth for a lot of mental health care services. We allowed for reimbursements for telehealth at parity with in-person visits. We want to make sure that the physicians are still deciding what's best for their patients. Sometimes you do need to be in person. Sometimes telehealth is perfectly appropriate, but we should continue reimbursing them at parity at the discretion of the physician. And we should continue to allow the regs to be updated to allow for that, because it really is expanding access. But then we've also got to have a harder conversation as a society about what's going on here. It cannot all be on the side of trying to meet this big tsunami of mental health need. We also have to address the systemic drivers of this. Some of it is closing the schools. We did tremendous backwards closing the schools did tremendous damage to kids' socio-emotional well-being. We have to acknowledge that. We have to repair that, and we should not repeat that. We have to interrogate the role of social media and increasingly these investments in online 3D virtual realities known as the metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg is trying to build to get 8 to 15-year-olds spending more time on his platforms. We've got to interrogate what role that has in adolescent cognitive development. Because just common sense tells you that as a 14-year-old, putting pictures of yourself for the world to see and rate is probably not a great idea. And many people smarter than me have weighed in and said that it's not a great idea. And when a company gets to $2 trillion, the only entity big enough to stop it is Congress, and we need to take action. I can keep going, but those are a number of the areas we've got to address.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Karen Weber, and I'm very impressed with the work you've been doing.
Thank you.
I am very concerned about accountability and truth in our country, and it's been very frustrating to watch the Congress try to wind its way from January 6th. So I'm just curious what is happening, and do you feel that something will come in the next few months to account and to hold people responsible?
There has been a special committee, the January 6th Commission, bipartisan, that has laid out in painstaking detail the pattern of facts, both leading up to January 6th, including President Trump's inducements to the mob, as well as the actual events, really minute by minute, of January 6th itself. I think just having that shared archived set of facts for current events and for posterity is an important service unto itself. It is also going to lead and has led to accountability, both in terms of people's public reputations, but also in terms of legal action. We have seen people and will continue to see people being held to account legally for their role on January 6th. And, you know, first and foremost, that should include Donald Trump, because we have Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which says that if you swear an oath to the Constitution as a federal officer, you cannot then incite an insurrection against the federal government. Super specific about it. It's illegal. And he did exactly that. If what he did is not that, then I don't even know what those words mean. And we have now a finding of fact on that matter. What we need is a finding of law. And that could be done by a vote in the House of Representatives. That could be done ideally by a bicameral vote in Congress. It would then be litigated, I'm sure, by him to the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court would uphold Congress's finding on a 14th Amendment violation. But to me, that is the clear and present next step. How optimistic am I that that happens, especially if Republicans take the gavel in 2 weeks' time? It's going to be tough. But the 14th Amendment finding, one, is important for accountability and for the rule of law. Two, it has this really nice feature that it prevents a person who violated it from running for office again.
I have negative questions, but I'm not gonna hog, so. My name is Elliot Schickler. I'm stitching you as congressman, and I'll just ask. My father passed in 2018 from squamous cell sarcoma, which is a form of cancer. My mom passed 18 months ago, renal failure, her kidney issues, and what I want to know is what's being done to find cures for cancer and kidney disease.
I'm sorry for your losses, and as the rabbi said in her introduction, I try to be a student of history and a student of scientific history. I grew up in a family of physician scientists, and one pattern that emerges is that the 19th century was really a century where chemistry was the dominant field, and the discoveries in chemistry were what drove so much of the progress. In the 20th century, it was physics. In the 21st century, it's going to be biology. What's happening here in Brookline, in Cambridge, in Watertown, in Waltham, in Boston, throughout Eastern Massachusetts, with biomedical research is stunning. And it's going to be written about, and it's going to change patients' lives. President Biden, recognizing that, has announced his own cancer moonshot, which is unlocking a significant source of federal funds to partner private sector with public sector to try to solve the very hardest problems in cancer. The genesis of cell mutation, retroengineering for trying to create really a cancer vaccine, and a host of other therapeutics and cures. And he has also announced the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H, modeled after a number of other successful initiatives in the Department of Defense and Energy, to take on the hardest problems that even the big pharmaceutical companies or biotechs don't have the risk appetite for, Alzheimer's being one of them potentially. And I'm working along with a number of others in the delegation to get that cited here in Massachusetts, because that agency needs to be where the best science is, and the best science in the world is happening here in Massachusetts. This is an issue close to my heart. My mom is the head of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and I know day in, day out, the work that they're doing there, both in delivering hope and care to patients, and also in trying to, frankly, put themselves out of business by curing this disease once and for all.
Congressman, thank you so much for being here tonight. Super impressed with everything you've said. Tell us what's fun about being in Congress. Like, what's it like to be in Washington? Like, tell us a fun story where, you know, what we live in Brookline. It's a little boring. Talk to us about the most fun thing about being a congressman. I
got two little kids, two and a half and one. So my wife's patience for me having fun in Washington while she's here in Massachusetts with the two kids is very limited, I would say. Let me say two things on that. First, the Congress is not what social media and cable news would have you believe. There's 435 people in the lower chamber of Congress, and 400 of them, of both parties, you could go out to dinner with your spouse, their spouse, and have a normal conversation. They're interesting people. They've done interesting things in their lives. You may disagree with them on a host of issues, but they're reasonable human beings with common sense and decency. 35 of them really are kind of crazy, but it's about par for the course for the, makes sense. And so one big fun part is, we were in a chamber probably twice as big as this for these long vote series. I mean, hours sometimes, especially for debating a big bill. And it's like a big high school cafeteria. You're just kind of walking around and bumping into folks. And it is definitionally a cross section of the United States, right? I mean, it's literally divided up exactly 800,000 people at a time, choosing one person to come represent them. And so I really try to just go over, talk to people I don't know, and start with questions as opposed to declarations, right? Where are you from? What do your constituents talk about? What are you hearing? That's fun. That's sort of that's something that energizes me and gives me a lot of confidence, because these are good people. We may think them, when we see them on cable news, we may think that they're not, but most of them are decent. The other fun thing is I've always been kind of a nerd, and I get to think and talk about 10 different subjects a day in 30-minute segments. Pharmacy benefit managers, Ukraine, the appropriations cycle, a commuter rail station in the district, offshore wind, and get to be around people who know more about it than I do and try to soak in information. And that's a lot of fun as well. So I didn't get to give you a good anecdote, I'm sorry. I'm not good at stories, but I do have fun, and I appreciate the opportunity to get to represent you all in there and do this job.
So I think we'll probably have time for like 2 more questions. So. Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Jethro Berkman. I live in Newton. I'm married to the rabbi. I found it really powerful what you said about the kind of disintegration of epistemological solid ground. And you mentioned journalism in your comments on that. And we can kind of see the fragmentation of the media landscape and creation of all these echo chambers and the algorithms on social media further fragmenting and kind of pulling us away from some kind of solid ground of truth. So you said government doesn't have a role or might not have a role to play in that. I would love to hear your thoughts on how do we start, particularly in the realm of journalism and the media, how do we move towards some kind of shared story, shared truth that we can debate about, but that is real?
Absolutely. It's a profoundly good question. And the intent of my remarks is not to say that there is not specific legislation for the integrity of law, journalism, science, and government itself that could not be important. Of course there is, but really just to say that civil society, to me, and our shared culture of common facts is upstream even of our politics. Our politics will not be healthy if we don't have that culture. There are so many threads to pull on there. I'll choose one, which is local journalism in particular. We have seen, even, in my political career, which has been pretty brief, a precipitous decline in the health and distribution of local journalists. Joe Kennedy said to me when I took over, he said, when I took office, which was back in 2012, there were 2.5 full-time political journalists in the Massachusetts 4th. They were holding him to account. They were going, when he did a town hall, they would go and cover it. They would check in on what he was doing. By the time he handed off the job to me, zero. And what does that mean? That means that what fills the void is Facebook pages. What fills the void is politicians distributing their own information out to constituents. We try to do that with mailers and with newsletters. I know local politicians do that. We're trying to perform a public service, but constituents deserve a third-party orthogonal viewpoint on what we're doing on the people's behalf. That is part of a healthy democracy. And in some ways it's getting worse, but in some ways I'm starting to see glimmers of hope. So it's getting worse in the sense that the traditional papers, the Newton tab, the Brookline tab are really, really struggling. I'm also seeing some experimentation. New Bedford has the New Bedford Light, which is a nonprofit entity that has brought in some very good seasoned editors and is doing public interest journalism, investigative journalism, entirely online, and is trying to broaden its reach and show that it can be viable. We're seeing the same thing in Worcester. ProPublica has been doing a number of experiments throughout the country with local journalism, trying to get journalist students on a beat in different local papers and subsidizing their pay. It is really challenging to think about what a distribution business model might look like in an era when Facebook and Google have taken 50% of all advertising revenues. And nobody has cracked that yet. But we can keep experimenting.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I wrote for the Brookline Tab for about 20 years. My name's Susie Davidson. And just on a lighter note, on election night in 2020, my persuasion is probably more aligned with Jesse Mermel, but I felt that you were the type of rising young leader in the tradition of Massachusetts spawning charismatic leaders. And maybe this is what we need more. So my boyfriend here, who's usually right, said, don't worry, he's behind, but Fall River has not reported yet. And it's going to come down to Fall River because they like the marine thing. And he was right. And I mean, whatever, you know, hopefully, but you know, Jessie Mermel donated a kidney shortly thereafter. So I think her contribution is certainly, you know, just as impressive. So anyway, on that note, it's very frustrating, as someone said before, that, you know, the country's doing very well. The economy is doing well. The deficit has decreased. It just came out this week by half. And by all measures, President Biden has done very well. And yet, it said today in the paper, he is underwater all through America, can't even appear with candidates. So for me, a solution is having young leaders such as yourself. Military background doesn't hurt, so maybe aligning with Seth Moulton or Pete Buttigieg, so many women also who have served in the military, and making some kind of cadre to speak to the younger people who are getting this misinformation on Facebook and Google and other news sites, TikTok, whatever. And making like your own kind of, you know, appearances and getting that young vote. I think that it's really a big thing. People such as yourself, that they cannot say anything, you know, bad about. They can't insult Joe Biden's stuttering and, you know, Fetterman's behavior the other night, which is so upsetting to read that.
Let me comment on two things.
Okay, I know that was a little rambling.
So it is absolutely worth reflecting on and celebrating that actually the 117th Congress, which is Joe Biden's first 2 years in office, has been one of the most productive, and I'll note, one of the most bipartisan in history. American Rescue Plan, to start off, cut childhood poverty by 40%, reopen the schools, reopen the economy, got Americans back to work, got shots in arms, help put the pandemic in the rearview mirror, sent about $300 billion to states and cities for clean water, for expanding high-speed internet access. That fall, bipartisan infrastructure law. We'd spent, I mean, infrastructure week had become a punchline, right? We did it. We did it with Joe Biden. And it was Republicans and Democrats. It was fixing roads and bridges. It was public transit, electrical grid upgrades, which are hugely important and underappreciated. Buses, commuter rail. Followed that with the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. Give America the edge on semiconductor manufacturing again, as well as investing in basic research, both biomedical and clean energy. Turbocharge our innovation economy, which we know is really going to be one of the defining axes of competition in this world. Followed that with a bipartisan gun safety law, which if you had asked me coming into the 117th, Jake, are we going to do bipartisan gun safety? I would have said no chance. Is that law good enough? No, it's nowhere near good enough. We have to ban assault weapons. We got to have safe storage. We have to have universal background checks. But it is a start. It will save some lives. Passed an anti-lynching law after 100 years of trying to do that. And then, as I mentioned in my remarks, just this August, passed what I think is actually going to be the signature accomplishment of this administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest, boldest climate action and clean energy commitment in history. There's not even a second place when you look at the rest of the world. All told, $500 billion is being put to work for the transition to a clean energy future for the United States. Our kids, our grandkids are going to look back on 2022 and say, this was an inflection point. It changed. We got closer to 1.5 than to 3 degrees Celsius by 2050 because of this. It's a big deal. By the way, it's going to be great for the Massachusetts economy. We are going to create a ton of good jobs, offshore wind, solar, battery, fusion, fission, everything because of this bill. So a lot has been done. There's a lot of this country, though, that is very vulnerable to the price of gas, the price of food, the price of housing. And those have all gone up. And that is a stark economic reality. It has wiped away much of the wage gains that we have seen in a strong economic recovery. And until and unless we can get inflation, I say until we will get it under control, it's going to be very challenging for the person who's associated with stewardship of the economy. It's 3 ways that we can get inflation under control, and 3 only. Tighter monetary policy, we're doing it. Tighter fiscal policy, as you said, we are cutting the deficit, and then expanding the productive capacity of the economy. We got to get more immigration here to expand our workforce. We got to build more housing, Massachusetts in particular, to get housing costs down. And we have got to free ourselves from this liquid natural gas and oil addiction that we have that makes us extremely sensitive to global energy shocks. But yes, I am going out around the country on behalf of the president, and I've been one of the strongest defenders of the Biden administration. I go on MSNBC, I defend the president from the hard left. I go on Fox News, I defend the president from the right. I fight for Joe Biden. I don't always agree with him on everything. And when I don't, I'll tell him and I'll vote the other way. But he's had a very successful first 2 years, and we've got to stand by him, in particular because he's standing in the abyss right now. The alternative to Joe Biden is not like, you know, some like Mitt Romney in 2012 between this. We're talking about Donald Trump and an extremist GOP that has divorced itself from the basic norms and conventions of democracy.
Congressman, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you all for your questions. This was really just an incredible treat and privilege for us to be able to hear from you in this way, in this historic place, on this historic occasion. You're all invited to join us for dessert out in the sanctuary foyer, and hope to see you tomorrow as our learning together continues, and at future events this year. Thank you all. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you again, Congressman. Thank you.